Hi class, this week we are going to be talking about arrays. Arrays are a kind of important part of programming, and I think this session will also probably help you understand loops just a little bit more. So an array you can think of it as just a list of variables that you keep in one individual variable. So let's say you needed to keep 10 different integer values in a specific program. You could just type out each one, int val1, and then you could go integer val2, etc., etc., etc. But you can see where that would be cumbersome, especially if you start talking about a lot more than 10, if you're talking about 100 or 1,000 even variables that you need to keep information on. So to do that, we have an array that we can use. There are also other things that do this that are similar to arrays that we will get into later on in the class. So if you hear me use the term list, which is what I'm trying to prevent myself from saying, think array, because I'm not meaning to talk about a C# list. We will actually talk about C# lists later on. They are also an important part of programming. But in this session, we're concentrating on arrays because they're the most basic form of storing multiple values in one. So to create a new array, it's extremely simple. If we wanted to create an array of integers, all we have to do is use the keyword int to say we want to create an integer. And then we use the square brackets. The square brackets indicate that we are dealing with an array. You'll understand why those square brackets are there a little bit just a little bit. So just like we would declare any other variable, we tell it the type, and then we put the indication that we're going to be using an array, and let's just call this int array. And that's all you have to do to declare an array. Now, most of the time, you will see the declaration of an array and the initialization of the array in the exact same line. Just for example, I'm going to keep them separate, but we'll go back and I'll show you what I mean. So we've declared the array here. We've said we want to create an integer array, and we're naming it int array. And then all arrays have to be initialized. If you don't initialize the array, it's never going to work. So we have to say int array equals, and then you have to use the keyword new, just like you would if you were creating an object. So where we use primitive types, we can just set it equal to a number, for example. Anytime we're using more complex types or anything that we've defined, we have to use that keyword new. It's the same thing with arrays. So make sure you use the keyword new, and then we have to tell it what the type is again. So we're going to say int, that we're creating an int array, and then we have to tell it how many different slots we want to create in that array. So if we wanted to create a 5-digit array, we would just put a 5 in between those brackets. So here we have, again, the line where we declare the array. It is an integer array. We do not put any numbers in here when we're declaring the array. We are just saying we are creating an array. Then we initialize the array, and when we initialize the array, we have to tell it what size we're creating. So we're creating an integer array of size 5. And what that means is that there are 5 slots in this integer array that I can store numbers. We can access those slots by using those square brackets. So if I say int array, and then I'm going to tell it I want to access data in slot 0, I can set the data in slot 0 equal to a number. And you can see it allows me to do that. So int array slot 0 is now filled with 5. I can keep going, and I can do slot 1 equal to 2, slot 2 equal to 29, And you don't necessarily have to go in order. We could do slot 5, or sorry, slot 4 now and skip slot 3 and set that to whatever we want. Now notice that I started with 0 here. All arrays always start with 0. So when we create a 5-character array, we're creating an array that starts at slot 0 and goes through slot 4. So this number here, it's not the ending number of the array that you're dealing with. This is the number of spaces or slots inside that array. So for a 5-character array, we have 0 through 4. If we wanted to create a 6-character array, we would have had to, then we'd have 0 through 5. We'll just go ahead and finish filling these slots with numbers. So now we have our integer array, and we've declared it, we've initialized it, and we've set values in all of the different slots of it. And now we can access that array. You know, we could do a console.writeLine, and then we could do int array, and then we could say let's grab the value of 2 and write that out to the screen. So if I run this, oops, it's going to go very quick because I forgot to put the console.readLine. So we run this and you can see it pulled the value out of slot 2, which is 29, and it's displaying that to the screen. Now hopefully you're seeing where the synergy is in between arrays and loops. Creating an array by just saying we want to create a 5-character array and throwing all these numbers in here is doable, but it's not very practical. The most common way that you're going to see that happen is that you're going to see an array filled is using a for loop. And the reason why a for loop lends itself to arrays a little better than a while loop is because they're finite and they have a value associated with them. They're not an infinite loop, and they're not a sentinel loop where you have to set a condition equal to true. It is just I'm going to execute this loop X number of times and you're good. So if we create our for loop saying we're going to use I as our counter, so integer I equals 0, and then we're going to say when I is less than 5, and then I plus plus, we can come in here and we can now set the value of the different spots in the array simply by adding the I in between these brackets. So what's going to happen here is every time we iterate the loop, it's going to start at 0 and it's going to go through 4 because 4 is less than 5. 5 is equal to 5, so it won't hit 5. And then it's just going to substitute that integer value right here into the array as it's executing. So we can just put that character I in there, and so we want to say access the I slot in the array, and let's just set it to I times 3. And so what that's going to do is it's going to take the value of I, multiply it by 3, and store it in that section of the array. When we execute this, you'll see we get 6. So at the second spot in this, or sorry, the slot 2 in this, which would be the third slot in it, we multiply 2 times 3, we get 6. And you can see that there. Let me go ahead and hit a debug point in here. We haven't gone over this yet in class, and we actually have a session coming up where we're going to be talking all about debugging and using some of the tools inside Visual Studio for helping you figure out where problems are in your code. But if you just click on any little spot over in this gray bar next to your code, it's going to put what's called a breakpoint in. And what that breakpoint does is it's going to stop the code from executing when it hits that breakpoint, and it's going to show you where it is in Visual Studio. So let's go ahead and debug that. And you can see it came up with our console window, and then it stopped us right here. So it's stopped us at that yellow line. And when it's doing that, we can hover over variables and we can see what the values of them are. So we can see that I is 0, and we can look at this integer array and you can see what's in the different spots. I'm just going to go ahead and hit the continue button, and what it's going to do is it's going to iterate the program until it hits that breakpoint again. And then we can look at the variables again. So let's see, I is now 1, and then the integer array, int array, sorry, you can see, well, slot 0 is going to be 0 because 0 times 3 is 0. So let's go ahead and continue once more. The I value is now 1. We look at that integer array, and you can see it's put that 3 into that first slot for us. Continue again, and you can see now we've got 6 in there, and it's just going to keep going just like that until it's done, and then it will pop back out to our console again. It will tell us, hey, there's your value that you were looking for. Okay, so obviously we can do arrays with more than just integers. You can do arrays with any type of the primitive values. If we wanted to do a string array, we could do string, again, put our brackets in, and we'll just call this str array. Before we do that, though, let's create another variable. Let's create an integer variable, and we're going to call this one size. And let's set that equal to 8. Just picking a random number out of the air. So we now have this integer variable set to 8, and we're going to call that size. So remember also I told you I would show you how to create the array, or declare the array and initialize the array all in one line. You can do that by just saying string array, str array equals, and then new, and then we have to do our string array here. And let's use that variable size. And basically what we're doing here is, or what I'm trying to show you, is that you can create arrays that are dynamic in size. So if we had some programmatic method for setting the number, the value of size, that would now tell us what size we want that variable to be. And in fact, let's go ahead and do that. Let's just write a quick little program here. So we're going to have integer size. Then let's do a console.writeLine, enter the size. And then we will read that in to that size variable. So we're going to set size equal to, and then I'm going to use integer.tryparse, and then we're going to do console dot, we'll use readline. Oops, actually I'm doing that wrong. We're going to do the try pause, and then we're going to say out size. So now what this is going to do is it's just going to check as it's putting the data into that variable size that it is actually a number and not some funky character that somebody put in. So we've got that part in there, and we're reading that in. So that size is going to be whatever value we put in, and then when we create the string array, it's going to be set it to the size of size. Now let's write a for loop again. So we're going to go for, and then we're just going to say int equals 0, while I is less than size. Again, using that size variable to determine what the size of the array is. Then we're going to say I plus plus. And let's go ahead and, oops, forgot to say declare the name of my variable in there. So integer I equals 0, while I is less than size, I plus plus. Let's go ahead and read something in from the user when we do that. So we're going to do a console.writeLine. We're going to say just enter some text. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set string array of I. So we want to put it into the I position, which we're going to start at 0 and then go through whatever we create the size of the array, equals console.readLine. Let's get rid of this. Let's go ahead and put a little breakpoint there so that when we get to that end, we can go back and look at our values in the code. So let's run that. It's going to ask us to enter the size of the array. Let's just say 3, and it's going to should ask us to enter some text 3 times. Some text, some more text, even more text. So we're done entering that. You can notice by the fact that this is highlighted yellow, we've gotten to our breakpoint. So let's go in here and let's hover over string array and let's see what we have in there. And boom, there you go. You can see we've got the text that we entered in stored in the different slots of our array. So now let me show you one of my favorite loops. I'll be honest, I very rarely use a for loop. I also very rarely use a while loop. But I do very commonly in my programs use something called a for each loop. And you can use a for each loop just by giving it the keyword for each, opening a parenthesis, and what you can think about with a for each loop, it's very similar to a for loop where it's got a finite number that it's going to execute. But what it's going to do is it's going to say for each slot in the array, I want to execute and do something. The way you declare a for each loop is you have to give it a variable that is going to hold whatever it is in each slot in that array. So we can just say string, and let's just call this I again for simplicity's sake, and then comma str array. And that's going to declare our for each loop. And oops, I'm sorry, I told you wrong. This is one of those things I get so used to doing it that it's hard to talk and type and do this at the same time. So we're going to say for each string I in the str array. So the str array is an array of string values. So we're saying for every string value that's in that array, I want to do something. There is a slightly easier kind of shortcut way to do this. If you remember back, I think it was like week 2, we talked about generic types. If you use the keyword var, and I just say for each var I in string array, what var is going to do is it is going to just say whatever type this is, whatever type is in here, I'm just going to use that type here. It kind of allows you to cheat and not necessarily have to know what is in here to be able to access it. So you can either use string, and you can strongly type, which is what that's called doing, your for each statement, or you can use the keyword var in your statement, and it's just going to say, okay, whatever types this array is, whatever types are stored in this array, I'm just going to use that. When we start talking about lists, this is the most common way to access everything in the list. So for each var I, in this case it's going to be a string, and if we hover over that, it's actually even going to tell us that, hey, it's going to be a string. We want to execute in this, what's in this loop. So let's just do a console.writeLine, and then we can just tell it I. So I is a string value in this case. It's not an integer. In fact, let's just go ahead and change that to S to make it a little bit easier to understand there. So for every S in string array, we want to do something. So we're going to, boom, S. We're going to do a console.writeLine, and we're going to take that string and we're going to spit it out to the console. Let's go ahead and just do a dot writeLine, and we'll just put like a list of dashes in there too, so just to make it whatever. Alright, so let's run this. Let's choose our size. Let's do 3 again, and then let's just type in some text, or text, even, or text. So you can see it spits those back out for us, spits them right back out to the screen. So up until this point, we have just used primitive types with the array, with making arrays. You can also make arrays with objects that you build yourself. So if we were to come down here and create a new class, we'll just call this public class, and we'll just call it my class. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. And let's put an integer value, and we're going to call that int val. And let's create a string value, and we're going to call that string val. Very, very simple class. It holds an integer value and a string value. We can create an array of my class. So if I just come up here and say my class and put my array symbols on there, and we'll just call this my class array equals new my class array, and we'll just say 2. This is going to create an array of these objects that we've defined with my class. We can access, let me go ahead and make these public variables. So we can write a quick for loop here. We're going to say for int I equals 0, semicolon, I is less than 2, I plus plus. And then every time we do that, we can access my class array I, I, not 1. And then we can access that integer value and set it equal to something. And let's set it equal to I times 2. And then we can also access the string variable that's in that object as well and set it equal to something. And let's just set it to, this is a string. We'll just write a quick for each to spit this out to the screen. So something I'm going to point out here is the 2 different ways that we actually use the 2 different loops when dealing with arrays. So in a for loop, we actually use the name of the array and we give it the bracket and tell it what index level or what slot we need to access within that array. In the for each loop, we actually take this part right here and we assign it to this variable that we're calling O here. So we're creating this variable O, and it equals that right there. So that's why we only have the O down here when we run that. So let's, oops, almost forgot console.read again. And we'll run it. Oopsie. And I have an error. Aha. I forgot. This is a very, very common error, and this happens a lot. Whenever you see object reference not set to an instant of an object, what does that mean? It means we forgot to initialize our object. Forgot to actually make it equal something. So we need to say my class array, and then we need to give it the slot number equals new my class. So even though we've initialized the array up here, we have to initialize each object inside of the array whenever we want to access those objects inside the array. So you need to make sure that you actually initialize the objects inside of the array as well when you're using an array of objects. So we run that, and there you go. It's telling us that, you know, 0, this is a string, 2, this is a string, which is the value that we should have expected. 0 times 2 is 0, 1 times 2 is 2. So there is some more information in the textbook this week about arrays, covering how you can initialize arrays using a list of numbers and how you can pass arrays back and forth between methods. That is important to know. Go ahead and read that. But I think I've gotten you enough that you can get through assignment 8 without that stuff. I've built in sort of a reprieve into the syllabus so that if we got to this point and we needed some extra time, we can do that. Because next week I have us doing nothing but going back over loops and arrays again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make assignment 8, instead of being a 1-week project, I'm going to make it a 2-week project. But I am going to require that you submit whatever you have of assignment 8 this week. Doesn't have to work, doesn't have to be perfect, but I just need you to submit something for assignment 8, and it will just carry over until the next week as well. So let's go over what we're going to be doing. We are going to be actually starting all over again. We're not going to be reusing any code that we have in the past. So we're going to be creating a new program. The program that we're going to be creating is a job, or is a program for a carpet layer, or somebody who installs wall-to-wall carpet for a living. The idea of the program is that you will create an application that somebody can use to estimate how much it's going to cost to carpet an entire house. I created a quick flow diagram for you so that you can hopefully understand the application. Basically what we want to do is we want to cycle through. We want to ask the user how many rooms they want to carpet, and then read in that number of rooms. Make sure it was an integer. We're going to test this. We are going to make sure that whatever they put into the system was actually a number. If it wasn't a number, we're going to tell them, nope, do it again, put in a real number. If they do put in a real number, for every room inside the number of rooms that they give us, we are going to have them enter the room name, the type of carpet they're putting down, the length, the width, and the price. And we're going to loop through that, and we're going to do that for every single one of the rooms that they enter up here, and we're going to do that with a loop. Once we're done with that, we're going to calculate the total area that needs to be carpeted, and then we're going to calculate the cost of that carpet. and then we're going to display that to the user. We're going to spit it back out to the screen. Something that's a little bit different this week that we haven't done in the past is we're actually going to allow the user to run this program again. So we're really going to run the entire program inside a giant while loop that says while whatever the escape character is that you give it is not set to the escape character. So most common, you could do something like press X to exit or press any key to continue. So we'll say while the escape character doesn't equal X, just keep running the program, and we'll allow it to loop through several different times. The requirements for this program: you must use a while loop to allow the user to continue to execute the program until they decide to exit. So you need to use that giant while loop that I was talking about, create an escape character, and say while the loop doesn't equal the escape character, execute the code. Verify that when you ask for a number, that they actually enter in a number. And I mean every place that happens. So when we enter in the length, if we're asking for an integer value, they've got to give us an integer value. If they put in anything else, that should cause our program to reprompt them to enter in an actual number. To hold the information about each of the rooms, I'd like you to create a room class. A very simple class. It just has to have room name, carpet type, length, width, and price. Keep in mind that price is going to be a double value, not an integer value, because we are going to use decimal points there. You must create an array of room objects to complete the assignment. So I want to see at least one array in your program and it to be of these room objects and storing all this information on there. You have to use a for loop to allow the user to enter data. So I want you to use, just like I was doing in the programs, I want you to use a for loop to enter data just like this, where we create the array of classes, we initialize it, and then we set all of the values inside of that array. Then I want you to use a for each loop to calculate all of the totals, and you can use that same for each loop to display everything to the screen. So you need to spit back all of this information to the user, and you need to calculate what the area is based off the length and the width, and you have to calculate the total price to carpet that room and display that to the user. So like I said, this week, this assignment is going to cover 2 weeks, but I want you to get started on the assignment this week. And to do that, what I'm going to do is, if you do not turn in any assignment by Sunday at midnight for assignment 8, the maximum grade you will be able to get on assignment 8 is going to be 80%. So if you don't turn anything in this week, you won't be able to get full credit for the assignment. Now, of course, if something comes up, if you can't get it in, email me, let me know ahead of time, and we'll make exceptions for people that have good reason to not get that assignment in. But just make sure you contact me before Sunday night to let me know. As always, you can, if you get stuck on a position, part of this assignment, email me. I'll be happy to help you. When you do turn in your assignment at the midway point on Sunday, I will go over it. I'm going to try to do that Monday so that you guys have that back and have the entire week to work on the rest of the assignment. But I will be giving you comments. I'll help you as much as I can on getting that a final assignment completed. That should be it for tonight. Have a good night. Thank you.